that's why we call this, in our intro video, we call this the art of leadership and the artist of leadership. And they're all different. Yeah. I mean, every artist is different. They use a little bit different style, and you know, you've seen them. You know, people that are completely different than you and me are very successful leaders. You know, you and I are different. We're successful leaders. That's the interesting thing about leadership, I think, is people can be great leaders and they can have a different type of personality. Don't have to lead in a certain way. We're not trying to make cookie cutter leaders out of people, but we're trying to teach them the skills and the flexibility and the agility to be effective in what they do. And that's a challenge for an organization. That's where I think that mentoring and coaching can be so successful. If people hadn't walked along beside me and encouraged me and helped me along the way and challenged me, I couldn't be successful today. And I would venture to say you'd probably feel the same way yourself.
Absolutely, be first in line. I would also tell you, I mean, of the things, and you had asked me earlier, what are the things that we're doing in organizations I've worked in or am today? I mean, there are basic price points of entry, if you will. I mean, you need to identify what leadership skills, competencies you expect in the organization. You need to hold people accountable to it. You need to define them. You need to train to them, develop to them, etc. You also need to have, you know, basic succession planning. You need to understand kind of, you got to plot people in a 9-box, 4-box, or however you plot them to say, hey, look, what are the ones that I'm kind of placing a few bets on right now, not because of their personalities or because they're my friends, but because of specific analysis that we've done or their true performance, hopefully is the majority of it, and what we think is their capabilities. And you got to do those. One of the things that I think that we don't do enough, and you just mentioned it, is coaching and mentoring. And I would tell you that that's where the real discussions happen. I had a mentee, this was just a couple of weeks ago. She was in my office and she said, Charles, I want you to tell me what people really think of me. I said, why are you asking me? Why aren't you asking your supervisor? Well, I'm not sure they're really giving me the skinny. So you know me, I'm candid. I told her, again, I think I did it in the right way, at least from my definition of the right way, and it shocked her. I mean, it really shocked her, and I would tell you that we walked through why would the organization or the people that externally she deals with, why would they believe that? Gave her a few examples that I'd even witnessed, and she said, you know what? I kind of had that thought, I may have that reputation, if you will, but hearing you say that, wow. That just, now it connected. Well, then it wasn't a couple weeks ago, sorry, it was a couple of months ago. So then a couple of weeks ago, she came back and we were having another discussion because she's really, I mean, first of all, you have to kind of look in the mirror and acknowledge. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a 12-step program. You have to acknowledge that you have a problem.
That's hard for leaders to do, isn't it?
Yeah, because of that confidence.
Confidence, absolutely.
I have no problems. I got here, right? And so she had gone from one ditch to the other. And I said, hang on a second. What have we been talking about in this organization for the last 4 or 5 years? Authenticity. You can't automatically be that other person. Nobody's going to believe you. Right. You have to find a way, and what's made you successful today, to shape some different, kind of smooth the rough edges out a little bit, take a little bit different approach. But if you make massive leaps, trust me, one of those is going to be off a cliff. There's not going to be a net.
Great advice.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's not that leadership development takes forever. But it is constant.
Yeah, and it's tweaking our style. You know, I'm asked to come in and provide that feedback as a coach frequently for people, and people have a hard time hearing some of those things, and yet these folks that I'm asking, the people that, like the young lady you're talking about, have been very successful. They wouldn't have gotten where they are without having some capacity for that role, and yet there's some things when they have that insight they need to do a little differently. And I think you're right, they don't have to change who they are, but they've got to make some adjustments. And what you said, though, I think is critical, is how you provide that feedback and provide support to help a person make that shift is what's critical for an organization. You know, some people provide feedback and just, rip someone apart, and the person goes, well, what do I do with this? Because they're not provided the support to get back and adjust those things. And so I really appreciate where you were with this young lady. Is not only are you here, but let me help you get where you need to go and give you some feedback as you're trying to go that direction. And I think that's the value of the mentorship relationship.
But you know how we got there, Tony, is we got there through trust.
Yeah.
I would tell you, this particular individual, I have been mentoring for a couple of years, and we've had a couple of different types of mentoring relationships. Some is just on getting the business done. Yeah. And from a business perspective, how do I make the P&L work? And then sometimes it's about leadership. And then sometimes it's about, strategic thinking and those kinds of components. This one never came up. Now, some could chastise me to go, well, if you knew that for a year or so, why wouldn't you say something? Well, I think it's situational. If you asked me to be your mentor, and then on our second meeting I said, you know what people really think of you, Tony? I think you're an idiot. I mean, it would be like, what kind of mentoring relationship is this? I'm out. And so I think it was over a period of time that trust got to a point that she felt comfortable asking me to be very candid. I'm begging you, be as candid and authentic as you can be in the response to the question I'm going to ask.
Isn't it great though to have a leader come to that place where they're asking you for that kind of feedback? I mean, that's at least a step toward the humility that says I have room to grow and be different.
Yeah. And you know what? One of the things that maybe we should have started with is, what is my development plan? It's about that thick, okay? And I know there's some people in this room that might be familiar with some of my previous development challenges, having worked with me in my past. I am not perfect, and
none of us are.
Well, I hope we're not. And I would tell you that my development plan is thick and constant and revisited and evolving, and one that I have, it's that thick, not my plan, but all of my plans over the year. I actually have my 360s and my Berkmans and PDI assessments, all of those. Over the last 15 years, I've kept every one of them because I want to go back and remind myself where I came from, and then remind myself how far I got to go.
Wow.
And I think, and by the way, every one of my direct reports, everyone that I mentor with, the first thing I do is I bring that big book out and I sit it there and I go, what do you want to know about me? Because I got problems too. I'm not perfect. Yeah. And I think that starts to build that trust. But then you have to realize as a leader that even in the coaching and mentoring, because some people will think that, as I move up in my career, then I become the mentor, and I then bestow my wisdom upon the masses. Let them eat cake, and in the end, it's not that way. They're feeding you cake too. Yeah. If you're not listening.
Yeah. And you said you still have a mentor.
Oh, absolutely.
You still have someone who pours into you and helps you grow and develop that has been down your road before.
And you know what? He has one too.
Okay.
And he's not a young individual.
Wow.
And I hope that when I'm 90, if I'm still around, that I have a mentor. And it doesn't have to be somebody older than me. I can tell you they can be a lot younger.
Steve Reineman the other day, former CEO of PepsiCo, said he has his own personal board of directors. He had his board of directors in the company, but he has a personal one as well, which are those people who will tell him the truth. He said his wife is number one on that board, but he has other people on that board as well. They meet regularly to give him feedback. And when you get to that place where you think that you've arrived, let them eat cake kind of deal, you do need people to tell you that sometimes the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
And because it's easy.
Good.
It's easy to figure out sometimes. It's sometimes too easy to hear all the accolades people give you because of the position. That it's not always easy to get the truth that you need. So I do appreciate that about you. Other question I have for you, Charles, this is a little bit different direction. So often leadership derailment, and I don't want to focus on the negative here, but I think there's some positive that come out of this for organizations, is often due to what I call personal and moral failure. And I hate to see that happen to an individual, but I also ask the question, when that happens for them, they lose their credibility. What can an organization do? Generally, sometimes we put that personal stuff and say that's their business and we leave it alone. But is there anything an organization can do to help an individual either avoid those kind of things or recover from them should they occur. And what do you see organizations doing to help their leaders make sure that that doesn't become an issue of derailment for them or loss of credibility for them?
If there's one thing that keeps me up at night, is obviously my kids, because they're really young. Well, one's graduating here in a few days and heading to college, but
wow.
so they're growing up fast. But it's, have I, as a father and as a parent and as a parenting team with my wife, have we instilled enough of the right values, morals, characteristics of the Baldwin name? Not that it's any different than the Hawk name. I mean, we're not a special name, but it's my heritage.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's my responsibility. I don't know that leaders and organizations have come to the realization that as much emphasis as they put on earnings per share, shareholder equity, the value of their company, the P&L on a weekly, monthly, annual basis, it's equally as important that they think very hard about, have I reinforced as the CEO or the CAO or the C whatever or a frontline manager, have I enforced enough about the values of the company and what we stand for and what we don't tolerate in this organization? And I would tell you, Judy Campbell, you and I have known her for many years. She certainly was a great partner in Walmart and has continued to be such at Cabela's. And I have a lot of high respect and regard for her. I have a quote from hers. Actually, it's a formula from her on my desk, right behind me on the buffet. And it says basically, how do you get to an ethical dilemma? And it starts with bad judgment. And bad judgment begins with ultimately when your personal values or the values of the company become compromised because of the stresses of the business. So I went backwards, forwards, let me go forwards, backwards. So when ultimately the pressures and stresses of the business, you got to hit a number, you got to do this, you got to do that, because we have to turn this in, we have to report this externally, becomes so heavy that you debate whether or not I should get it the right way or the wrong way. Personal debate or a company value debate. That ultimately you tilt towards the results versus the value, and those start piling up. Those bad judgments, those are bad judgments, by the way. When you start multiplying those ultimately end up to an ethical dilemma. And it's kind of like the white lie. You know, it just keeps building and building and building. And so for us, and I would tell you, I felt very strongly about this at Walmart. I feel equally as strong at Cabela's. We have core values hanging on the wall, but it's no secret that Enron had core values hanging on the wall.
Absolutely.
And they were very similar to a lot of companies of respect and service and honesty and integrity. Just hanging on the wall doesn't make a difference. And just putting them in concrete, although it makes them a little bit more permanent in your front atrium, doesn't make a difference if the leadership doesn't constantly reinforce that. And truly, there are some times our legal team challenges me frequently, did we give the right medicine to cure the headache? You know, because I mean, not everybody has to have an arm chopped off or, you know, the death sentence for every little thing, but ultimately there has to be accountability. But do we ultimately know as leaders, again, to that rope analogy, how much rope do you give when it comes to morals and values? And when more and more rope is given, then guess what? More and more people begin to use that as a behavior change that then lead to bad decisions and ultimately starts veering into the ditch. I don't think any company that's been around for 10, 20, 30 years just gets a leader that all of a sudden yanks the steering wheel and drives them into the ditch. It's that death by 1,000 slashes. And that's something I think we have to constantly fight against. I hope I'm never put in that situation. personally, but I would
But
tell
the pressures are always there, aren't they, for business?
Absolutely.
I mean, especially in a publicly held business, your demands for quarterly objectives, and those demands are there. We can't make those go away. Shouldn't make them go away in any business. And so the pressures are there, so that squeeze is always going to happen. And so I think that comes back even to that mentor relationship, someone who's coaching me about how to manage through those difficult situations. And one of the things I get concerned about with leaders is the greatest fear I have is isolation. Is leaders isolate themselves, and I think you've talked a lot about the value of getting out of that isolation, having mentors and being a mentor to others. That isolation can get you in trouble, and it can cause part of that either moral downfall or even your business objective downfall, because I'm not willing to ask for help. I'm not being humble enough to say I don't have this figured out. And great leaders, at least I believe, tend to be humble enough to ask for help where they know they don't know the answers.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to date this interview, but I would tell you that our country has witnessed just in the last couple of weeks a true example, and Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, may be the worst leader ever. That is, time will tell.
Yeah.
He's only been on the job technically, I think, 90 days or so.
Okay.
But the reality is, he was put in a very unique circumstance just a week ago, where, the pressures of his customers, the fans, the pressures of his employees, and ultimately the people that make the business run, the NBA players, had built so quickly, within hours of a comment being made by an owner, that he ultimately had to make a decision. And there was a lot of ways he could have gone, many different ways.
Yeah.
And I would tell you that because of what appears to be a conviction against discrimination, and the bylaws of which the business he runs suggest he can operate, he took the maximum penalty and drew a very bright line.
Didn't he?
And ultimately got immediate support from the masses, sports, people affiliated with sports, and even those not. But what I found very interesting in listening to his press conference, where he announced what that bright line was going to be, is he mentioned that he had talked to the players. He had talked to the owners. He had actually listened. He didn't sit in a room and go, okay, what's the policy? What do I really personally feel? I'm the leader in charge. This is my decision. No, he sought quickly input. And by the way, went directly to the source. Conflict management, conflict resolution, didn't avoid it.
Yeah.
Hit it straight head on. And then most importantly, he did something bold. Yeah. And you know what? It's lonely on the top.
Yeah. You mentioned bold, courage as an aspect of leadership.
Absolutely.
I don't know how you teach that.
I don't either.
You can demonstrate that. People can witness that. I think that's where you pick it up. You watch courage like that and you go, that's what it takes to be a leader.
Now, I don't put him on a pedestal because you know what? I don't know the man.
Yeah.
And tomorrow he could fall off the moral wagon. And I just don't know that.
Yeah.
But I would tell you, one of the things that I've learned over time, and one of the former leaders of Walmart mentioned it several times in our leadership classes, is you can learn so much, not in the classroom, not on the job, just by watching leaders across the world and how they react to situations and which ones are successful and which ones aren't. You can watch presidents, you can watch other company leaders, you can watch nonprofit leaders, all those things. And when there's an issue, if they handle it swift but smartly but fully informed, what's the results? And if they kind of let it drag on and don't address it right away, and it's in the news, and then it gets really big, and then more people hear, and then it really was true, and it was never addressed. And so ultimately, what I have found is that leadership principles and learnings are everywhere.
Yeah. You mentioned that. I love historical biographies about leaders too, because it gives you such insight into the dilemmas they face and the challenges they face and how they handled some of those. And may not be a bad resource for us. No. We're pointing some of our folks to. Couple more questions, Charles. If you were to advise the 25-year-old Charles, knowing where you are today, what are 2 or 3 things you'd tell him about what it would take to be successful in the future?
Hindsight's 20/20.
I know it. That's good. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. One is I'd tell myself to be more patient than I was. I probably moved a few times in my career because I wanted to make more money. I wanted a different title. In all candor, that's what it was. I took some steps I probably wasn't ready for, but I was
pretty attractive for young guys, aren't they?
I had enough ego. It wasn't confident. It was true ego. That, hey, if you could do it, I could do it better.
Right.
And so I would tell myself to be a little bit more patient. I would tell myself that, and it's probably not obvious in this interview, but I need to listen more than I talk. And I really do believe that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. It's a 2-to-1 ratio, and you really do need to listen more than you talk. And I've observed our CEO, Tommy Milner, which is a fantastic leader, worked with Lee Scott and Mike Duke and David Glass at Walmart, and I observed in those leaders, and I know Doug McMillan is the same way, having had some interaction with him in prior life, that not prior life in that I lived at a time.
I got it.
When I was at a different company, that ultimately those individuals are successful because I think they really do genuinely care. Yeah. They care about people. I think they listen. They don't think they have all the answers. And I think when I was 25 years old, I thought I was invincible, as most 25-year-olds do, and I should be running the company, and I was still an assistant manager in a store, and I should be patient. And I would also remind myself that once I got out of college, learning didn't stop. Yeah. And I would tell you there was
barely started, isn't it?
Yeah. I would tell you there's probably a span of 5 years or so, probably between 25 and 30, where I knew it all. So I didn't even try to learn. One of the things that has always been beating my brain is Mr. Sam. We had a video of Mr. Sam saying that you want to know retailing, study retailing. Read it about it. Go to your competitors. Read the periodicals back then. Read the industry rags. And study it and learn it, and it's constantly changing. So keep doing it. And I think that's become a part of one of my leadership muscles, is to be thirsty for knowledge and opportunities even like this, to maybe I learned something in this exchange. And if not, maybe it connects me to the next person sitting in this chair that I learned from them. And that thirst for knowledge has got to continue to be part of your DNA if you're going to grow. And then, so be patient, certainly continue to have that thirst for knowledge, and then whatever you do, wherever you end up, you didn't get there on your own. Okay. I mean, nobody got where they are today because of who they are unless they inherited some money. That's about it, right? Other than that, you got where you are, not because you earned your way there, but people pushed you up. Yeah. They helped you get there. Yeah. And if you ever lose that humbleness, that respect from which you came, those who got you where you are today, you may get where you are, I don't think you're going to stay long.
Yeah. Well, the reality is, when you think about that, as I look at my career, anybody else could be doing my job.
Yeah, well, mine.
Lots of people. I could point them out, that pushed me up and said, you could be doing, and I know they could be doing it, but they found value in helping me succeed. I don't think they knew where I would be this stage in my life. They probably didn't know where you would be. I'm sure they're very proud to have an impact and an opportunity to influence you along the way. So one last question, Charles. Not everybody who's watching us here on Conversations on Leadership come from companies like Cabela's and Walmart. Some of them are small companies, small to medium-sized businesses that don't have the resources that the organizations we've been associated with have had. What advice would you give those guys about what they can do to really step into developing leaders in their organization? I know we've probably talked about all that. What would you tell them? Here are some things you really should step in to do or could step in to do to really grow people effectively in your companies.
I think when I left Walmart, company-wide, it was $280 billion, and went to Cabela's, which was $2 billion. Company-wide, Walmart had almost 2 million associates when I left, and Cabela's had 11,000.
Yeah.
And I candidly thought that that I would struggle with that it would be a slower pace, that it would be, how do I impact small numbers at the same rate you do big numbers, et cetera. And what kept ringing in my mind was what David Glass was always asked when it was portrayed that at some time Walmart could be $1 trillion company. How do you run a $500 billion company or $1 trillion company? Or I think at the time maybe in a couple $100 billion. He said, I don't have a clue. Here's what I do know. I know how to run one store at a time.
Yeah.
One associate at a time. And then in the end, if you know how to do that, you put the X and whatever the X times behind that, that's how the ultimate company runs.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ever lose sight, whatever size you are, that it's one associate, one outfitter in Cabela's terms, one store, one facility at a time, and you get caught up in, wow, we were a $10 million company and now we're a $500 million company. We used to have 100 or 1,000 outfitters, and now we have 2,000 or 5,000, and man, we're 5 times the size, and we're so big and we can do all this stuff. I think you start losing the concept of reality, which is it all comes back to the single person. One person can screw up your business model. One bad apple and people can really truly spoil the bunch.
Right.
And the challenge is, how do you make sure that all your apples in the barrel stay good? And if one start getting a little bit rancid,
Deal with it. Yeah.
you deal with it, you manage it. And I think that's ultimately the challenge. And so when I made that transition, I feel very strongly about leadership development. I feel very strongly about succession planning. I feel very strongly about making sure that you have candid conversations. And I know there's a lot of noise in the marketplace today in the HR world about evaluations. You know, do you abolish them? There's some companies that are, and do you move from, truly having it written on paper to just having a conversation? And is it a 3 scale or a 5 scale? And is it twice a year? And all that noise, don't get caught up in it. What's the root that has to happen? I have to sit down with you at some point and tell you how you're doing.
If we don't formalize that, it's not going to happen. Often those people
may
who
or may
avoid,
not, depends on
those
the
people
culture
who
of
are
the
avoiders
company.
may just be avoiders.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, you can't avoid the conversation. You have to have that. And so however in your organization you do, you get it done. So if you're in a very small organization, you go, well, how do I have leadership development? Well, do you have any leadership individuals in your company? People of leaders or leaders in your company? If the answer is yes, which you have to because you have a company, right, then guess what? You can have a leadership development program, right, because if for nothing else, it can be leaders developing leaders. And that's what we actually called our first initiative when I went to Cabela's. We rolled out our first leadership program, if you can believe it or not, as a 45-year-old company. Wow. When I got there and didn't have really any leadership programs. And we were growing and expanding, and it was like, man, we got to have some kind of directional beacon here. And so we started with leaders developing leaders. So we would grab what we thought were good leaders in the organization, stick them in front of growing leaders in the organization, and say, talk to them.
Yeah, it doesn't have to cost a fortune.
No,
it doesn't have to be
it
a program.
doesn't.
It has to be, and again, we've talked about it, even the people who've been involved in your development were people developing you.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't, the training, as I said, the training and all the assessments and all those things we do are very valuable. But it's people investing in people. And so what I hear you saying, that becomes the critical part, is that we have those conversations and we develop people.
Yeah, and you got to have the directional beacons. You got to know, we sat down as an executive team and said, okay, we know what the core values are. They're hanging on the wall. We feel pretty good about those and we think we follow them. But truly leadership competencies, what we expect leaders to do. Let's identify those. And yeah, you can get really scientific about it, and you can just talk about it. And there's probably a great answer in between there somewhere, but at least start talking about it. And if you can write 5 things down that you think leaders really need to do for the future, kind of today is your core values of future, where you're skating to, where the puck's going to be, as Wayne Gretzky would say, then that's what you can then start having your leaders to talk to the future leaders about. That's their curriculum. And then if you want to get a little bit fancy, then you can define those, and then you can build some curriculum around it, maybe invite a special guest or a facilitator, and you can start growing those. But you don't have to say, wow, woe is me, I don't have $1 million training budget, so I guess we can never have training in our company. No, hogwash. Not only because we're in Arkansas, but true hogwash.
Yeah. Well, if we don't develop them, I think you've seen that. What happens if I develop my leaders? If I develop my leaders and they leave? The recurring comment that happens: what if I don't develop them and they stay? You know, the investment in those leaders is very much, I think, very worthwhile, and I think you've attested to that. Charles, thank you for joining us in Conversations with Leaders. Is there anything you'd like to just leave us with, wrap up with, or close off with?
Well, I don't know if there's anything specific, but if I can ramble just for a second.
Absolutely.
Tony, I think what you're doing is really interesting, and I will be encouraged to see others' perspectives. I was told early in my career by a successful leader, don't ever try to be me or I'll fire you. and that was very candid.
Don't need another one of me, do we?
Well, their point was, there's only one of me. You can't be me. You don't have my resume, you don't have my experiences, you don't have my credibility, whatever those things are that made that individual who they are. I could never emulate that. And then later in life, I learned that you do learn a lot more from bad leaders than you do good leaders. And so when people come to me over time and have said, man, I think that's the right job for me, but man, I couldn't work for that leader. I mean, don't set yourself up for failure, by no means, but don't avoid opportunity because you think it's a bad leader, because I can tell you leaders come and go.
That's interesting.
And so make sure that you don't shortchange yourself because you think you have the worst leader, and wow, I could be so great if I was working for Tony, but because I'm working for Charles, I'll never get ahead in life. I bet you're learning more from a bad leader than a good leader if you listen. And I think the important thing is, and what I've learned, because I've worked for a few suspect leaders, is ultimately I keep telling myself, if I'm ever in that opportunity, I will never do that.
Wow.
Don't ever forget that then if you say that. And if you're ever given that opportunity, don't do that.
That's
and do everything you can to develop. So if my challenge to everyone is, even those who teach leadership, even to you and myself, is we have an opportunity to continue to grow. Even though we may not have a development program to go to, heck, even if I don't even have a mentor, figure one out, but you should. But if you don't, you still have opportunities to learn from those you interact with. And that is ultimately it. We are human organisms. We are changing as a human as we continue to grow and age. Our muscles, our brain is a muscle that has to be exercised, and you got to keep fertilizing it, bringing stuff in, and then kicking the bats, pulling the weeds and throwing them away, kicking them out. And that becomes who you ultimately are and who Tony is and Charles is, and we're different. But to your point, I think we're successful in our own way. But I would love to have some of your characteristics, but I just don't know what's in my DNA, you know? And so I just really want people to appreciate the concept of candor and authenticity and make sure that you're authentic in who you are, but that you realize you can always change. Good, thanks for the time.
Charles, thank you. You have, for our inaugural program, you have set the bar really, really high.
Oh, super.
We could take off on any of the things we brought up and just talk about it for a long time, but your insights are certainly evident that they're based in experience and a lot of learning and openness to learning. So thank you for being here. And thank you for participating with us. We hope that this has been beneficial and of value to you, that this virtual mentor as such can have impact in your world as well.